So I'm recording my homily for the first week in Advent, and we'll just go through some of the basics about Advent. But before I go into that, today's my day off, as you might imagine, and I'm actually on a day retreat with a couple priests, and we're up in Shaw Island. Now, many people know that the Benedictine sisters have a monastery up on Shaw Island in the San Juan Islands, but they don't often know that there's also another religious order here called the Mercy Sisters. And the Mercy Sisters have a charism where they often get very advanced degrees. They get PhDs, and so they tend to work in fields where a high level of expertise is needed. And so that's their charism. But they have a little retreat facility up here, and so we're just up here for about a day and a half. If you hear some noise going by, it's one of our Washington State ferries is going right by the island right now. But so it is a magnificent day. It is a beautiful day today. So Advent, which means to the coming, is a time of preparation. And there's two ways that we prepare for the coming of Jesus Christ. Now, the first is joyful. The first is focused on Christmas. The first is focused on the way that Jesus came to us in the flesh, how God became incarnate. God became one of us. God is with us. And it's a phenomenal thing. And so one of the attributes to somebody who really has embraced that God has become one of us, He's enfleshed, is joy. I mean, you can't help but be joyful when you think God of the universe has come down to be here with us. It's phenomenal. And to take that all in, it's not just about remembering the fact that He came to us in the flesh, that He became incarnate, that He was born among us. It's not just remembering that happened 2,000 years ago, but it's recognizing that in time and in eternity, He is here. He is here. He wasn't just was here, He is here and will be here. And so it's just a phenomenal thing to really embrace that in our lives. Now, Advent is a season where, leading up to Christmas, to when Jesus was born, we really try to actualize that in our life. We try to really live that joy of the incarnation of Jesus. Now, I'm going to get back to this in a second, but I want to say that our culture, even though it may be very secular and is not necessarily thinking about Jesus, as it prepares for Christmas, as our culture prepares for Christmas, even in a non-religious way, that there's some attributes to that we can glean and perhaps use to help people, to make them realize they are celebrating Advent, whether they realize it or not. They are preparing, right? And they are experiencing or trying to experience a deeper joy in their life. Now, before I go back to that, I want to get to the second part of Advent, and then I'll go back to the culture part. So the second part of Advent is preparation for Jesus' second coming, when Jesus in the flesh comes back at the end times, and He comes back for the final judgment, and He comes back to fulfill everything, if you will. Now, in preparing for that second coming, for that coming of Jesus, it gets a little more serious. Because when you start talking about the end of the world, people don't necessarily think of joy or hoping that happens soon. And yet the season of Advent is really that. It's that if we are truly in love with God, and God is truly in love with us, then we even experience that seriousness and the preparation for the second coming of Jesus. But we also even do that with joy. Now, let's go back a little bit. So our culture is really and truly celebrating Advent in a sense. Because if the two aspects of Advent are joy, but also a seriousness, almost an anxiety that goes with it, a concern or worries, which I'm getting a little worried because the waves are coming in from the ferry and I'm really close to the water here. I'll keep an eye on the waves. So, where was I? So our culture is joyful right now. At least it's trying to be. I mean, it's a to the people, it's a Christmas season. What are they doing? They're doing things that bring about joy. They're buying gifts. They're decorating their houses. They're putting the giant inflatable Santa Claus in the front lawn. I mean, they're doing all the things that people think bring them something to celebrate. So joyfulness. So I'd say, great. Our culture has, at least on a secular level, some desire for a deeper joy. Now, as people of faith, we have an avenue, we have an ability to help them encounter it far more than they ever thought. Because a secular joy, it'll always leave us empty. At least partially empty, right? We got seals right next to me. So the culture has that desire for joy. Now, the other thing that our culture also is experiencing during Advent is there is a seriousness. And there's a seriousness because there's a deadline. Christmas is going to come on December 25th. And so there's an anxiety of getting all their work done, mailing the packages and mailing their Christmas cards and all the cooking and everything that they're doing. There's a deadline. So you sense very clearly an anxiety, a frenetic frenzy of activity. The shopping malls are packed and people are standing in line, and all this stuff. And Black Friday, all those things represent an anxiety. Now, as we prepare for the second coming of Jesus, there is a deadline. There is a definite time when either Jesus comes again, or as the case may be, we die. I mean, there is a reckoning. There is a time when it all comes to completion. So our culture has those things. Now, I was just on vacation and I was watching way too much TV on vacation because I was visiting places where they had TV. I personally don't have a TV because I love TV and it's not good. So I had access to one on vacation in the places where I went. And one of the commercials I watched was a rather strange commercial, but I thought it exemplified the fact that the culture, even though it won't admit this comes from Jesus, and it won't talk about Jesus, there is something there. So this commercial is by Apple, so the makers of iPhone and MacBooks and all that. Now, the image is of a small town getting ready to celebrate Christmas. And so everybody's gathering in the town square around the Christmas tree. And so they're lighting the Christmas tree and they're getting ready to sing a song and they're all happy, they're joyful. And so it's really beautiful. Now, this is where it gets a little weird. Frankenstein, Frankenstein, the guy with the bolts in his neck? Well, he lives in this town, so he comes down from his house and he comes down to join them. And everybody is immediately terrified. I mean, the whole mood completely changes. And everybody's looking at him like, is he going to hurt us? Is he going to kill us? I mean, he's a monster. And so he proceeds then to take some Christmas lights. And the bolts in his neck for plugging in for electricity to give him life. He takes the Christmas lights and he screws them into the bolts and they light up, right? And it's kind of funny. But you think about, there's all kinds of symbolic connections here of who is the one who gives us life, right? Frankenstein is this monster that we created because we tried to do something without God. And yet God is the one who gives life. So here he is, this monster, right? Now, he plugs in the Christmas light bulbs and now everybody's still really uncertain about what to do. And so everybody's quiet and they're just kind of staring at him. Well, he opens up the songbook and he starts trying to sing the Christmas song. And it's Frankenstein, so he can't really sing, so it sounds horrible. Well, this little girl opens up her book and starts singing with him and helps him to sing. And then everybody just relaxes and realizes, okay, he's one to be loved, not feared. Now, what I liked about this was that Apple, this giant corporation, is promoting a message of not just, hey, it's Christmas, let's all love each other, but we need to love our enemy. I mean, the commercial is about loving one's enemy. Now, who is the only one who has ever proclaimed that? Jesus Christ. He's the only one who's proclaimed that message. And so Apple, whether they realize it or not, they're proclaiming the gospel. Now, it would be nice if at the bottom of the screen they could say, this is brought to you by, the Gospel of Matthew, from the Bible. If you want to really embrace this teaching, they're not going to do that. But anyways, so there's things going on in our culture right now that give us as Christians and Catholics an avenue into people's lives because they are seeking, okay? They desire it. All right, now, the other parts to preparation, the seriousness. So I'm reading a book right now. Actually, I'll hold it up. I don't think you can see it. But this book is called Overcoming Lukewarmness, Healing Your Soul's Sadness. And it's by Francis Fernandez Carvajal. Now, it's a great book. I'm not all the way through it. I'm about 20, 30 pages into it. But it's really phenomenal, because I think he starts talking about the connection between this real preparation that we need to do, not Christmas cards and baking cookies, but real preparation in terms of us, how we live our faith and the purpose behind it, the seriousness of it, and the joy. Now, he says that people who are lukewarm, so somebody who's lukewarm in the faith is somebody who's neither hot nor cold. In other words, they're not out there as an avowed atheist, but they're also definitely not excited about their faith. And so it's a person who's just kind of going through the motions. They're just jumping through the hoops. I'll go to Mass, but I don't really like going, or I don't really get anything out of it, or I'll pray because that's what a good Catholic is supposed to do, but nothing's really happening, and I don't even really desire for anything to happen. I have no expectations. And so what he says is that everyone who is lukewarm is someone who at one point did desire, they did have a love for God, but they gave up. Now, why would somebody give up? Maybe they were seeking something that wasn't God's will. And so when God didn't answer the prayer as they wanted it, they gave up. I can't even tell you how many people are lonely in our culture and desire intimacy, they desire love, and they'll pray to God for it, and they'll ask God, and they feel like there's no answer. They feel like they're just talking to a wall, and so eventually they give up. And so what happens is they become lukewarm. They'll go through the motions, but in reality, there's no joy. There's no desire. That's obviously where we don't want to be, right? And so we want to have that enthusiasm, the joy, the real joy, and the seriousness that comes through that in order to truly, truly embrace the coming of Jesus and to help Him be present here. Now, I saw a movie while I was on vacation. I'm not going to tell you what it was, but it was an action movie. So lots of explosions, lots of bullets, and lots of car chases and all that stuff. Now, you had two main characters in the movie. The first character, he is used to all the action. He's used to the explosions and the car chases. And so he's actually quite calm in the midst of it. And he's able to handle it. He's able to think clearly and to do what he needs to do in the midst of the chaos. Now, his sidekick is the exact opposite. He has no experience with this. He has no desire for it. And so he's really, really anxious. He's really nervous. And so in the midst of everything going on, he's shaking and his brain just kind of locks up. He becomes paralyzed. And the other person who's calm is the one who has to make all the decisions. Now, Francis in his book says that when somebody becomes lukewarm, they actually become paralyzed. They become rigid. They don't have the flexibility to do God's will because they don't know what God's will is. They're not listening. They don't desire it. And so somebody who's lukewarm becomes paralyzed, whether it's fear or any other emotion going on there, but they're paralyzed. They can't do what God wants them to do. A little example of that. In 1980, Mount St. Helens exploded, right? The volcanic eruption, and most people remember that event. It was a rather dramatic event. They knew it was going to explode for several weeks, if not several months. And they were trying to get everybody out. They were trying to get everybody out of their homes who were in the blast area. And there was one gentleman, Harry Truman. Harry Truman was an elderly man. He had a cabin up in the mountains close to Mount St. Helens. He had all his cats. It was a beautiful, beautiful place. He was happy. He was comfortable. But you know, when life is just about comfort, about earthly comfort, in some ways we become paralyzed by that. We become rigid. And anybody or anything that's going to take us out of our comfort, we react with hostility. And so the people kept trying to convince him that he needed to leave. And he refused to leave. He would not leave his home because that was his comfort. That was his little heaven, if you will. And so he died. And it's sad because he would rather die than change. Now, spiritually in our lives, when we become lukewarm, when we stop seeking God, when we've perhaps turned away from God because God didn't give us something that we wanted, or God didn't answer a prayer that we thought He should answer in a particular way, we become rigid. Now, what we do in that, we become paralyzed, and when something tries to pull us out to do something good, something charitable, something loving, we're not going to do it because it's going to violate our comfort zone, right? Now, in the readings today, Jesus is talking about Noah and the story of Noah. And you remember the story of Noah. And so Noah is a person who's being asked to do something very incredible, something that requires complete trust and faith, because it's lunacy to build this giant ark. I mean, it's crazy. Why would you do that? And everybody around him is totally comfortable. Life is good. They're eating, they're drinking, they're marrying, and I mean, they're just having a nice time. And so Noah and God, if you will, wants to call them out of that comfort. Because they want to live, they need to be living for something more. There's a mission there that they need to be doing. And so Noah, at some point, has to overcome any feelings he may have of doubt or of paralysis or fear. And he needs to become flexible in order to do God's will. And so at some point he needs to act, right? You need to act. And so in the movie that I was describing, there were points where these two characters, they had to act or else they would die, right? They had to act. They had to have that courage and the flexibility to go with what was happening. So now we cannot control our lives. We cannot control many of the things in our world. But we need to be flexible enough to see what the Holy Spirit wants us to do in the midst of that. So there's a person in my family who's been trying to get back in the faith, trying to get back their life back on track, and they've been struggling. And so he called me up while I was on vacation, and I saw, this is a little confession. I don't know if he's going to see this, but he's going to hear my confession here, and so I'm truly sorry for this. But when I saw who I was calling, I was like, I'm on vacation. You know, I was watching some dumb movie or something. I was watching something on TV. And so I was too lazy to answer my phone. I didn't want to disrupt my comfort. So he calls back a little bit later, a couple days later, and so we talk, and we have a phenomenal conversation, really great conversation. And so it's beautiful to see how the Holy Spirit's working in his life. And so after that, I just felt so horrible because I realized earlier, it's like Jesus was calling me. Jesus was calling me on the phone. And I rejected him. I didn't want to talk to him. And that was that was lukewarmness. It was the paralysis of not being in love. So Advent, it's a season ultimately of bringing these two important aspects together. It's joy, and it's the joy of the fullness of our faith and what it impels us to do. It's the joy of having a mission. It's the joy of being stretched outside of our comfort zone. And it's the seriousness of saying that I have, because of my faith, I can act, I can put things into action, things that need to happen. All right? So take advantage of the season. It's a beautiful season to really embrace it as fullness, and then share it with people. And you'd be surprised maybe how they'll open their heart to Jesus through that. All right, God bless.